Today's readings in the liturgy there's a wonderful reading if you have a chance to read the first reading from Exodus, where God is so upset. In a way, he forgets who he is, God. And Moses reminds him. Because the people who have been taken out of Egypt get distant from that God, and so they want a God that's closer, so they make one of their own, and they say, this is the God that has taken us out of Egypt. And Moses has a conversation with God. That's very interesting. God says, I'm going to abandon them. I'll get a new people. And Moses said, one moment, please. You made promises about who you would be for the people of Israel. And God says, you're right. So it's a nice conversation. But the gospel is very interesting. Luke's gospel is generally one of the ways in the themes of Luke's gospel. Luke is a lost and found gospel. Jesus in Luke is the only one in Luke's gospel that's lost in the temple. And all along you can see Jesus as finder or the welcomer. And the gospel today, there are two forms. There's a short form, which is the woman that lost the coins and found them, and she was very happy. And the man that lost his one sheep out of 99, and he got it back, and so he's very happy. But the long form, and what I really would like to share about, is the very long story of what we call the prodigal son. But there are three people in this gospel: the father and his younger son and his older son. And it's very helpful if you could consider yourself as being each of them. And that's what we'll go through. The question is, how do you define mercy? What is mercy? And the common thought is that mercy is forgiveness. And that God is basically full of mercy, merciful, and so God does nothing all day long but forgive us. And I had a wonderful friend in the Cajun area in southern United States, in the bayous, and he was convinced that if we didn't sin, God wouldn't have anything to do all day long. So that God is judge and forgiver all the time. Okay, I will make a statement for which I have no theological basis, but except it is the way I pray. That God is mainly healing, let's say 97%, and 3% forgiving. I have no basis for that. But I don't look at God as judge. I look at Jesus as finder and healer and sender. And we'll get to that. And that's at the basis of the Eucharist, of course. But let's take a little stroll through this scene, which is a wonderful scene, and you've heard about it and read about it. The son is a little wanderlust and wants to get out of town, and so he says, I would like you to share with me the inheritance that it comes to me. And what he's saying is, I will consider you dead then. And I will consider myself no longer your son. You're dead. Legally, you're dead because you've given me my part of the inheritance. So he goes off, and because he is not grateful, but self-centered, which may be actually a definition of sin, that we don't live out of gratitude, we live out of self-service, self-preoccupation. What's in it for me? I'm in it for me. What about me? And so he gets what he deserves. He gets himself, and that's all that's left of his inheritance. he gets himself. And he comes to his senses, a great image. He comes to his senses sitting in the pig pens. And he creates this little story of how he's going to manipulate his father to forgive him. Father, I have sinned. He's got his little talk all set. So he goes back. Okay, enough of him for a while. Now his father, who is the image of God, is not violating the son's freedom, but looking for him, searching for him. And he sees him at a great distance. And he does the running. He does the finding. We're back to that theme of lost and found. And the son starts his little spiel, and his father says, no, none of that. You cannot manipulate me by your sadness or your grief or whatever. Now we go back to the son. Is the son sorrowful? Or is he just aware that he made a mistake? He's sorry that he made a bad choice, but not that he offended his father. That's a perhaps. But he says, I have sinned against you. Is he really sorry? Which is the question. How sorry do you have to be forgiven? And many people think until they have tears or they feel really guilt and shame, it's all an emotional thing, then they come to God. Confession or their own prayer. And they, in a sense, they manipulate God's judgment. No, mercy is not judgment. God is full of healing, finding, and cannot be manipulated by our emotions. Maybe we have to forgive ourselves, yes. And the father's welcoming back his son might help his son forgive himself. That would be healing, more than forgiveness. So he says, let's have a great celebration. Kill the fatted calf, get a robe, get a ring, get shoes. I want to reestablish. I want my son to find himself. He has lost himself. Pretty good definition of what sin is. I've lost a sense of who I really am, and I have sold out for something cheaper, for which I am not grateful. If I were grateful, I'd reverence it. I'd receive it well. I'm not grateful. I am involved in myself. That's what the younger son is doing. So the father is an image of God. And then we look at ourselves and we say, I'm not so sure I can forgive that easily. I need to know that you're really, really sad or really repentant or you're really depressed at what you've done. Your condition might move my heart and I'll forgive you. But then the older son. Where are you when you're the older son? Now, the question is, are sins actions, or are the actions tied to attitude and motivation? The younger son was very selfish. That's his sin. What he did with the inheritance is secondary. His basic sin was his attitude towards his father. He wanted him dead. Dead, at least to the awareness of the younger son. But the older son, he did everything right. Quite dutiful. Quite righteous. And he did all things well. The question is, why did he do it? Did he do it for love of his father? Or was he rendering his father benevolent towards him? And he was dutiful and he was doing it to satisfy himself. Was he perhaps just as selfish as the younger son? Totally involved in himself. I did this. I've always been this. I've gone out early in the morning till late at night. All I wanted to do was to please you. It doesn't seem that this older son loved the father. He probably feared him and was doing all those things out of fear, that the attitude of fear might be quite similar to the attitude of the younger son, of not respect for his father, self-centeredness. So maybe the attitude of sin is more important than the actions of sin. And to pray with those attitudes of self-centeredness, both were self-centered. Now you say, but he did the right thing. Yes, but for what motive? And both were welcomed back. Come in to the celebration. The younger son could accept forgiveness very easily. We're not sure that the older son went into the party. Now, one final thing. Remember, way at the beginning of chapter 15 of Luke's Gospel, who are listening to these parables, these little stories about lost and found? It's the scribes and Pharisees who are quite upset that Jesus is eating with sinners. Not just sinners, but tax collectors. Worser or worser. Tax collectors who probably cheated. They were gathering taxes for Rome, the archenemy of Israel, the oppressor. So they were complicit with the Roman Empire. And the Pharisees are saying, that man, that new prophet, that new holy man he's on scene, he's not very holy because he eats with those who don't obey the law. So they are very older son. They have come from the old tradition of exactitude, righteousness, doing the right thing out of fear lest they be punished. So they hear these parables, and that gets Jesus more and more into trouble. But what he's saying, you Pharisees, you are like the older son. Yes, you've been around a long time doing all the right things, but why? What was your motivation? Fear? Was it to praise God? Was it to serve God? Or were you serving yourself just like the older son was? And the younger son was serving himself. But the younger son came to his senses and comes to the experience of being welcomed and found and given new life. The robe and the ring and the shoes, it's all about new life. Almost, you could say, the baptismal garment and the shoes for walking and the ring of identification and identity. You walked away, but I am alive. You thought you treated me as dead. I am quite alive and I am giving you life. That's healing. And that's what forgiveness is about. To heal my attitude, not just, I'm going to stop doing that. No, why? Well, it's not good for me. I feel bad when I do it. Yeah, that's all about you. Your attitude is still about you. And so is God's attitude towards us, healing us from not knowing who we are and healing us from trying to manipulate God. You've got to love me, God, because I do all the right things. One final little story. When I was a very young Jesuit and I worked out in the fields, and at night we had the last visit. We'd come before you went to bed, you go to chapel. And at night I would kind of touch and pick at my calluses. I had calluses and all over my hands from rakes and shovels and clippers. And this is embarrassing to say, but I also was aware that God was very good to me. I had 3 meals, wonderful friends, and a nice bed I was going to. And I said, God, you've been good to me and I've been good to you. I feel that it's pretty much even. You were good to me, I was good to you. And I can go to bed in peace because I'm square with you. I have served you and you are pleased with me and I am pleased with me, and that's very important. Well, during the years, I've let God be more healing and myself less preoccupied. I want to do good things, but I do them because of God and God's goodness, not to win it. The young son didn't win the father's love. The older son tried to win his father's love by all the good things he did. So we have a lot to enjoy, not to scourge ourselves how bad we are, but just how loving God is. He is more loving than we can imagine. Just one final thing, maybe. I never know. Would the father forgive the second son or the young son if the young son were to go off again? What if he does that in 6 months? He said, I'm out of here. Can you give me some more? What do you think the older son would say then? And what would the father say? Your love is everlasting. We have lots to pray with and enjoy. But our attitudes need to be healed.